My guest today is Wendy Ray Woods. We're at the RK Miles Lumber Yard, and Wendy's going to tell us about the passenger rail initiative that's going through. Well, we hope it will go through.
We certainly do hope it will go through, and I think if our committee has any say in it, we will make it happen. We're going to make it a reality. And I think maybe just to bring you up to speed here, no pun intended, and to get us on the right track, haha, I love to make rail jokes. I'd like to tell you a little something about the committee itself. It's called the Southwestern Rail Corridor Committee, and it's named that simply because we are standing right here in the midst of what is part of the Southwestern Rail Corridor. And we started about 3 years ago. Really came about as a result of some people being concerned about the fact that we are unserved here in this area and have been for more than half a century, actually, since 1953, I believe. And there had been a study a decade ago or a dozen years ago, and it kind of sat on the shelf, and we knew that there was a movement going on not only here in Vermont but regionally as well as nationally to really upgrade rail service and passenger rail service and connectivity for people who are unserved. So we decided that we were going to form this committee, the Citizens Committee, to act as a liaison between the parties that are actually going to make it happen, that being the state of Vermont and the state of New York, as well as the Federal Rail Administration and the consultant at that time who was not chosen to actually lead the study. And I'll fast forward right to here, and 2 years later, since we, well actually 3 years later since we formed the committee, the study is nearly done. It should be wrapped up next month or by March at the latest, and it's just very exciting what's been going on with not only working with the consultant, but working with the people right here in Manchester, in North Bennington, because that's the other site where the proposed rail station will be. And it's just been a very exciting process for all of us involved, including the state.
What kind of improvements would have to be done to make this happen?
Well, we are looking at a bi-state, an actual bi-state project. So it would involve New York and Vermont, and we're looking at upwards of over $100 million. And that involves rail improvements that would not only be just for passenger rail, but also upgrades for freight, because freight is what helps move this country along. And, you know, we're coming out of a recession, and we see this particular project as one of those pieces that's going to make that recovery really move forward and create some sustainability for the locations in which it will actually be serving.
So these tracks would be upgraded to, I think I read, a Class 3 track, which means the trains will be able to go how fast?
Up to 69, no, 59 or 60.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And currently they go 25, 30.
It's pushing it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the little engine that's doing that. So.
Yeah. And have they done a study on the ridership? Do they think that there's enough population here to use the rail?
They do. And, you know, there's the old saying of build it and they will come. Or you know, it will follow. And that is so true, especially with rail. Passenger rail in particular, is seen as a very realistic economic driver. And while we're seeing ridership numbers, which I personally think and our committee thinks are considerably lower than what we believe they actually will be, it's always better to be cautious on that side and be a bit more, shall we say, extensive on the expense side. And that's pretty much, you know, how the accounting end of this works, and the ridership, of course, is part of that accounting piece.
And I'll have a graphic to show
Yes.
that ridership projection.
Yes, and that's, I think that's really critical. I mean, they use the model, they being the consultant of VHB. And
VHB is what?
that's Vaness, Hangen, and Brucelin. And they're actually the consulting firm that was chosen 2 years ago to proceed with this study. And they're actually out of, I want to say, Maryland or Virginia, around the DC area, and they've done some major projects. They did the one, the Downeaster over in Maine, and they are currently the ones that were responsible for extending the metro out of DC Union Station out to Dulles Airport, which is still under progress. Yeah.
Now, if this goes through, how will it all be funded?
We're looking at an 80-20, and that would be 80% the Federal Rail Administration and 20% which would be divided up between the state of New York and the state of Vermont.
Okay.
So,
And it's going to the legislature this winter?
We would like to see it this winter or probably next year. The first step after the study is actually completed, and what we're waiting for right now are what is termed the PEs, and that's the preliminary engineering piece, and that's the piece that's going to be done within the next month or two. And what that means for us is that this project is shovel ready, which is truly exciting because we will just apply for the funding, and however long it takes. We do have a very strong congressional delegation to Washington with Senators Patrick Leahy and Bernie Sanders, both of whom are extremely supportive of this, as is Congressman Peter Welch. So, because this is one of the gateways into Vermont, it goes directly over to the Rensselaer Station in Troy, connected right down to New York City, and the gateway to the rest of the country and the world, for that matter.
Can you tell us about where, from Rensselaer, there are couple of alternative routes that they're looking at?
Two to be exact now.
Okay.
We've narrowed it down, and it's a bit complex right now. There will be, within the next few weeks and month, negotiations between the state of New York and the state of Vermont. Vermont actually owns the railway going up, the rail line going up from Rensselaer into Rutland. We pay for it.
That far down?
Yeah, we pay for that. So what we want to do is work with the state of New York and figure out who's paying for what and which rail gets moved, if it does, one of them being the Ethan Allen, which I'm sure a lot of people here in Vermont are familiar with that. If they go into New York or DC or further, that is the line that goes up to Rutland right now, and it passes.
It goes through New York up into Rutland.
Yes, yes, it does. Exactly. Yes, specify that, because they actually have two trains over there in Saratoga Springs, in that area. They have the Adirondack as well that goes up through there, whereas the Western Corridor, which we're standing right at, is totally unserved. They're being served twice, one of which is with our rail. So there are some negotiations that need to occur, and they will be occurring.
Can you tell us about the proposed Western Corridor? Where would that go? Where would they add stations?
We have two stations proposed. Right now we're looking at one train. It would be at a premium time where it would people would be able to access it. For example, if they wanted to go to New York City for the day and come back in the early evening, not early, but more like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And it has 2 stops, one of which we're standing at, which requires some sort of juggling of buildings here. This property is owned primarily by RK Miles, Mr. Joe Miles, and his company. The property that we are standing at right now is actually owned by the state of Vermont. Very convenient. So, so there could be some juggling of buildings. The primary concern is to keep the rail spur going for Mr. Miles and his company so that the lumber will not be affected. And we have a crossing further west down here that we want to, of course, also make sure is maintained so that both customers as well as employees can have access to the large building directly behind us. And there are other partners and people who own property adjacent to this that will be brought into the discussion of how we're going to manage this property here. And again, there will have to be conversation and negotiations as to how these things are going to kind of get fleshed out and exactly where the rail station will be. And I can't really talk too much about that at this point. We certainly have time in which to resolve any kind of issues or concerns that people may have here at this site. North Bennington is a lot less complex than this particular project here. There is the original historic station. I don't know if anyone has been down there to North Bennington, but it's a fabulous station built in the late 1800s, and it is in exquisite condition. It truly is. What we would like to see happen there is to access part of that beautiful building, have it open for people to wait for the train. However, the actual pickup for the train would be directly across the street. There's something that's referred to as, I'm sure most people know, the ADA, or the American Disabilities Act. And as of last June, they determined that we needed 425 feet of straight or tangent track in order to have a high platform so that people can get in and out of every single car. I know you may or may not have been on trains before, but sometimes they'll ask you to walk to another car to exit, or you enter one car and then you walk in between the cars to get to a car of your choice to be seated at. And that has changed in that they want to make the trains as accessible as possible.
By all cars.
By all cars. Hence the 400 plus feet of straight track. And that's been part of the issue, and that's why this site was ideal, because we had the 400 feet. Whereas in North Bennington, there's going to be probably some takings of property, as well as perhaps a little bit of straightening of rail, or the laying down of some extra rail to make it work absolutely beautifully. And it's pretty exciting. It really is. We actually have some ideas about themes for the rail stations. This one here has been talked about as possibly a big farmer's market, something very Vermont in that sense. And the one in North Bennington, which they have used many times in the past for art galleries and art exhibitions. And there is a big sculpture exhibit that goes on there during the summer. So it would seem very natural to just extend that throughout the year. And that would involve some upgrades to the building, but they're needed, and it would be just a wonderful...
For the audience, I just want to explain, the train would leave Rensselaer, go up the tracks to Mechanicville,
Yes.
and then veer off into southwestern Vermont.
Yes, it would.
And so a new station in North Bennington, Mechanicville, North Bennington, and Manchester
Mm-hmm.
and continue on up into Rutland.
Yes, correct.
Are there any plans of going further north?
Well, actually, initially the rail studies themselves, there were several of them. There was track 1, which is on the eastern side, which is actually accessed by the Vermonter. And then, and that's another Amtrak passenger rail. And then there has been a lot of talk about extending up to Burlington and beyond into Montreal. That is actually the ultimate goal, is to connect this area here with Canada. And there was a Track 2 study, which was the Rutland to Burlington area, which had been rejected 3 times when the study was presented to the Federal Rail Administration. I don't look at that as a real negative. Actually, what I see that as it was really a positive, because the FRA was actually signaling us that they wanted to take a more regional approach. It would only make sense to have the rail come in through the Southwestern corridor first before you extend north up to Burlington.
Right.
Because we have the connection right into New York City here. And of course, Albany, the Albany Rensselaer station is the 10th busiest station in the nation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So from there, you can also access lots of different trains as well.
Okay, so let's say some skiers want to come up to Stratton.
Yeah.
They get here. How do they get to Stratton from here?
Connectivity. Yes, and that's a big piece. That's a huge piece, because that's what's going to make it work. We have time to work on that. The mountain is, and the mountains, Bromley also, they are aware of this study, as is the Equinox and the other inns and motels in the area, not only here in Manchester but also in North Bennington. And we see it as a win-win for everyone. What we would like to see happen is, of course, to have some collaboration between the resorts, and perhaps maybe a single van or several vans running to come and pick up people here. In addition to that, we have the Green Mountain Community Network bus service that is run out of Bennington and comes up to here and then on up to Rutland. And they are aware of this. They are part of our committee. So I think the connectivity piece is, I think it's going to work.
Great.
Yes.
What's next for the committee, and what happens next?
Okay, next steps. Well, let's see. The study that was just pretty much completed, the consultant who has performed that study has given presentations over the last 2 years throughout this whole area. Last year I actually had Vermont VTrans, Vermont Agency of Transportation, come down here with Costa Pappas, who is the project manager there for this particular rail program, and give a presentation here to the people of Manchester, because none of the other formal presentations for the consultant were actually held here. So we'll be doing that again, probably in March or April. I will have VTrans back down here into Manchester itself. The committee meets normally on a monthly basis. That's the SVRCC committee, the Citizens Committee. And we discuss all sorts of ways of getting the communication out to people, like, for example, the mountains, marketing it through the newspapers, through, for example, Access TV, like we're doing right now. I'm scheduled to be on GNAT-TV coming up within the next month, and WBTN Radio out of Bennington, which I've been on before about this project. So there's a lot of that going on, and a lot of meetings that I attend, in particular with Vermont Agency of Transportation. I just met with the project manager the other day, and looking at some of the issues and concerns that have been raised over the years about crossings and how best to address them. That is, of course, folded into that whole project dollar amount that we talked about earlier. But I want to hear from the people themselves, from the various select boards, what their specific concerns are concerning the crossings themselves and how we can best address them. So that's some of the stuff that I'm working on. And the committee itself, like I said, we meet, we talk, we figure out our next steps and strategies of what we have to do just to really get the message out. And if we need to talk to the select boards, we plan that. For example, we have a presentation that we'll be giving to the select board in Bennington, as well as one here in Manchester, and most likely Arlington and Sunderland as well. Within the next 2 months, I would say. And it's, you know, it's good because I think we've been really helpful in moving the project forward. We worked very closely with the consultant. We had ideas, questions, concerns. If there was something we were uncomfortable with, we voiced those concerns, and I think we've been really helpful.
Is there, I understand this is still in its infancy, but is there a projected completion date?
Oh yes, there is. And that's even more exciting. We're looking at 3 construction seasons from when this application is actually sent off to the Federal Rail Administration. The weather being what it has been the last couple of years, it may even be sooner than that. But I think to be conservative, I would say 3 construction seasons, probably from this year or so. Looking at 2016.
That's exciting.
It is very exciting. Very, very exciting. I want to be the first one to be on that train. The only thing I'd like to probably add is that the committee itself actually urges citizens and businesses to write letters. They can send them directly to the Vermont Agency of Transportation in care of Brian Searles, who is the commissioner.
Can you spell that last name?
S-E-A-R-L-E-S. And also to Costa Pappas. He was the one directly involved in this project, and I can spell his name, C-O-S-T-A, Pappas, P-A-P-P-I-S. And just voice your support for the project and why you see it would benefit.
And do you have a website where people can get more information?
Just Facebook.
Okay.
And that's under Southwestern Rail Corridor Committee. So you could just, you know, plunk that into your Facebook search and you'll find a page.
Okay.
Okay.
Wonderful.
And we do also have a link with VRANs and a few other. You could find a link actually to the project study itself by going on to the Vermont Agency of Transportation.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, you're
That was great.
welcome. Okay,
Stay
terrific.
right-